Welcome to Artist Tales, a podcast that features and celebrates artists from different walks of life. I'm your host, Heather Martin, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Holly Revell, a London-based artist and photographer specialising in queer performance, portraits, and projects. Welcome, Holly.
Hi.
It's really good to have you on the podcast. So to start off, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into photography?
That's where to start. A long story, but I'll try and keep it brief. So a bit unconventional, but hey, isn't that lots of people's stories? I always wanted to go to art school, not really knowing what that was, but was not allowed to. Left school at 16. And I always say there was like a decade in the wilderness leaving school at 16 and then another decade in the wilderness when after I finished my degree in fine art, which I eventually found my way to in my mid-20s. So sort of working class background, and wasn't really aware of that when I was at university. I was quite blissfully unaware, but yeah, that's a thing. But I studied fine art. I've always been a photographer or a documenter. So back in the 90s, when sort of in a friendship group, I'd always be the person with the camera because there'd only be one person with a camera. So I'd always be taking pictures and documenting nights out. I hung around a lot with bands back then. I was kind of a groupie in the 90s, fag hag in the noughties, and then found my people in a sort of queerer community since. But so I've always sort of hung around with performers, I suppose, and photographed them. But when I was doing that, sort of in the 90s, just like socially, it was literally because I couldn't believe that I was like doing cool stuff because I was not a cool kid at school. And all of a sudden, like I say, I was hanging around with bands and having really cool nights out. Well, in my mind, there were anyway. So and then I studying fine art, kind of photography was, the lowest of the low. And so I never considered photography as an art and never wanted to be a photographer. I wanted to be an artist, whatever that entailed. I mean, I did lots of installation stuff, very theoretical stuff, sort of live interventions and things like that. But I also did lots of stuff with photography, sort of theoretical stuff and using photography. So it's always been there. And it wasn't really until a decade after, it took me a decade to figure out how to do anything. I didn't learn how to be an artist at art school, messed around with stuff and had a good time.
So you left art school and it sounded like it took you a while to kind of figure out your path as an artist.
Yeah, definitely. So, I moved to London and I spent, that first decade living in London straight after art school, I was working in a gay bar and basically spending all my time with gay men on the gay male scene and like still partying very hard and clubbing and that. And then I'd say like sort of this is important, or I guess, or interesting, because that was what informed the first sort of, what I'd say is the first like real sort of work that I did, which was a piece called Dark Room. And it was very much based on the theory of photography and, the language of the dark room, and then also the language of sort of gay male clubs and dark rooms. And I wanted to do something with photography, but I didn't want to generate more photography. Like I didn't want to take loads of pictures. I felt that the world is, I still feel like this, but I am now adding a lot more to it. But at the time that's not what I was interested in. I was interested in using photography to sort of make things happen. I was like really into happenings and live stuff and making photography a live thing. So anyway, I created these installations on club nights and sort of all sorts of different kinds of parties, sometimes in galleries, and it very depended on the venue as to how they would go. But they were in the dark. The camera was set up on a tripod on a bulb setting, so sort of locked open. And I'd do these really, really long exposure images in the dark, just lighting what I wanted to light. And I guess because of the darkness, everyone just took their clothes off. And depending, and things could get very hot or, people just like they'd always wanted to do a nude. And then all of a sudden they had this opportunity at a private view and like, so they just did it. So yes. And I was really into this idea of, doing stuff that liberating people, I suppose. That came from people saying that it was liberating doing it, though. It was all a process. And I created these spaces where anyone was allowed in, unlike the dark rooms that I found myself dumped outside of at the end of a night out. Anything could happen. And it did. And that was around 2009 I was doing those. And that at that time there was the sort of queer nightlife was sort of really interesting. There were these kind of little, I suppose, just like really weird pop-up performances here and there, kind of not quite cabaret, just stuff happening on the floor, and you were sort of meeting these like performance artists and that, and we were all sort of all in it together a bit and doing my stuff on the same night. On these kinds of nights, I then started to meet some of the like sort of really big sort of performance artists, queer performance artists in London, and started working with them. And I had no desire to photograph them or their work still, even though they were like really amazing and brilliant. But I still sort of wanted to do more what I considered arty stuff, I suppose. But anyway, I then was getting employed to photograph these people's shows. And so I did it because it was like, yay, great. Nice way to sort of get to know them better. It was my sort of incentive initially. It certainly wasn't a money thing. And I ended up working with the greatest performance artists of the queer underground and haven't looked back. So then I developed a freelance practice as well as my art practice. And so, my freelance is sort of documenting queer performance and artists predominantly, and sort of queer events and things. And then my practice has sort of evolved into a lot of portraiture and bodywork, all to do sort of all around queer identities. And that, so there's lots of crossover. And somehow I've managed to get a really nice balance of freelance work and my own work. I do a bit of teaching as well, and it's all really nicely balanced, but it's taken me a while to get here.
I think that can take some time to develop, and it sounds like you've been kind of exploring quite a lot as well. And I do find it really interesting, and, perhaps we can, talk about it more, kind of the queer culture you're photographing, because, in many ways that is, it's not necessarily mainstream, and performance art in itself is not necessarily mainstream. And it sort of sounds like you kind of stumbled upon it, or it's not something initially actively sought out, but you kind of found a home there. I don't want to say by accident, but it's kind of that happy instance, if you know what I mean.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I really found my people. I found the weirdos, the people that I fitted in with, I felt, they sort of, it was more of an equal kind of relationship than, say, when I was just hanging around with gay men and going to gay clubs, although I was, again, blissfully unaware at the time of the power dynamics or whatever. I was quite happy. But and in terms of doing anything artistically and creatively, they're the people that gave me a platform, the performance artists. And also, like, a bit, even though it wasn't quite my world, but there was a bit of crossover into like sort of sex parties and things. And so the Erotic Awards, which was with Tuppy Owens and a performer called Mouse, and that there is like a bit of a crossover between live art and performance art, and then those sort of parties and things. And they were the very first people to give me a platform to try things out. And sort of to the students I work with, I'm like, photography can really help you find your people.
And a voice as well, from the sounds of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I used to always like I'd never admit to like the camera being a social tool in the past. I don't know, that's too embarrassing, but I really think it has been my whole life. From making myself useful to bands in the 90s, and that having something to do, a role, sort of getting that got me in. Not that was why I did it initially, but it was, it's always, I've always just done things because I want to do them, and always sort of like gone out on my own and like pushed myself into the worlds that I want to be in. But it's the camera that's helped push me forward in those worlds and get to know those people. And that's, still to this day.
It sounds to me like it was a way to engage with people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think it makes it easier, I guess. I mean, I was definitely, and always have been sort of documenting for myself. I've always written diaries and things as well. So I think that came first, but it definitely sort of helps. I don't know. Like, yeah, I do like having something to do and I guess something useful, something to offer. Maybe I don't know. I like to be involved and be part of it. I mean, my first love when I was at school was drama and acting. I actually wanted to be a performer, but that got axed, and there was no opportunities, or I just forgot about that, and then art was the way. But I didn't know photography was art until a long time later.
And it sounds like your view of photography has changed. So it sounds like now it's kind of, you see it as art. How long did that journey last? Is it fairly recent realization, or is it, something that just kind of evolved over time?
Yeah, that's definitely evolved since I started freelancing. So when I started documenting other people's work, I was enjoying it, but I didn't see it as art or a sort of great, it was really fun, and yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was a good thing to do, but I definitely didn't see it as art, and there was a real separation. But I think working with, so particularly sort of Scotty, who was like one of the big performers that I was working with, really showed me opened up my eyes to the sort of the creative world of documentation. And then I started to see it as an art. And I guess the more I was doing it, I was like, oh, I'm building quite an archive here. I'm working with all these like brilliant, amazing performers, getting all these like really, fantastic images. And I mean, now I've got such a massive archive of people and performance. Like a decade of that is at Bishopsgate Institute. And I always say that'll be my sort of the last thing I do will be the most gigantic ever coffee table book of all the performance. And I've definitely captured in sort of from about the late noughties to like that decade to, I guess, to the pandemic. That period, that was a specific moment in queer sort of culture and nightlife, and it's ever evolving, and I'm very proud to have captured that in London, and that's definitely art as well.
And to me, it sounds like it's documenting or documentary type of photography, but in a very artistic way. And it really sounds like, the documenting yourself, documenting others, documenting queer cultures seems really important to you. And to me, that kind of jives with me. I kind of been finding probably much more, until you've mentioned it, much more on a subconscious level of kind of documenting life around me.
Yeah, I think so it started when I was working with Scotty, and they were like really savvy about having their work documented, and I became like their personal photographer, and I was a massive fan and, totally in awe and in love with this person. And they certainly, we had a great friendship developed out of that, but it was very much a friendship of a performer and their photographer kind of thing. And I loved it. So, and I'd say, less artists it was like, I was always like, oh, the liveness is the most important thing and we shouldn't ruin it by taking loads of pictures. And so another artist that I've worked extremely close with for many, many, many years, and again was one of the first people to give me a platform, is David Hoyle, who I also made a book with 6-7 years ago. And he is like the godfather of avant-garde sort of drag performance, gender bending, whatever. And but I felt like everyone was taking pictures at his shows, and so I really didn't want to take pictures. And he was letting me I was doing my installations in the toilets at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern while he was on stage. And there were these really mad nights, and I was spending more and more time with him, getting to know him, and in the dressing room backstage. And like, it took me years to actually photograph backstage, because I just there was always people knocking on the door wanting to take photos, and I just thought it was so rude and so intrusive. But David in the end was pretty much ordered me to photograph him backstage, and that then became this real almost part of his process for many years, having me in this tiny little dressing room just photographing all those stages of the evening. And that's where the photo book that I did with him came from, because there's so much intimate work that had sort of grown. So now it's like everything is documented. And yeah, I guess back then, so I felt some people were well documented, others weren't. But it's weird, like no one had ever done a book on David. And like in the end, I was like, oh, I've got to do this before someone else does. But still, no one's ever done that. And I'm really surprised, because it felt like everyone was photographing his shows and things. And yeah, I mean, people have really picked up on the importance of documenting queer culture now. And like there is a big archive from at least the past 10 years, but I think there's not that much from before. And so, yeah, the queer archive is a big thing now.
And I think that's really important. I've been to the Bishopsgate Institute, which is in central London. And I know they're doing a lot of work in sort of curating, working class culture, queer culture, women's culture, sort of people have been marginalized before. And what you're saying is kind of, as I said, is really driving with me, because increasingly I'm finding I'm kind of drawn to communities. I think before I was, probably historically I was very much, archiving or documenting run-of-the-mill, like very mainstream stuff. And I'm finding myself probably more doing sort of parts of London that are slowly being gentrified and being becoming more hipster.
Mm-hmm.
But there's little pockets where it's the old, Petticoat Lane market, or some of these markets that haven't been gentrified, but you get they're beautiful. I find them, I love them in the sense of they're still rough around the edges, and you get a good, it's very mixed, and it's more the working class. And, what I'm hearing is the importance of kind of taking pictures of people who are not part of necessarily, or on the fringes, not part of necessarily the mainstream. And you're right, like Bishopsgate Institute, I did a tour on, their queer archives. And until quite recently, probably the last 20, 30, 40 years, there's more of a shift, from straight culture documenting us and their lens to actually let's document ourselves from our perspective, from our lens.
That's what I was going to say. That's something that's always been really important to me, is like this sort of from an insider's point of view is so important. And like, I used to do a lot at The Glory, which was Johnny Woo and John Sizzle's place pub in the early days of that. And then you'd get the magazines coming down and just like taking these like very sort of surface pictures and that for their articles. I mean, it was obviously good for the venue and the people getting, sort of publicity or whatever, but I always felt that, they just popped in and popped out, and I was always there. And yeah, that's always definitely something that's important. And I think now more and more people are doing it for themselves, definitely.
And I think that's really important, And I'm conscious of being kind of a white person going into very mixed areas, and, it's kind of, do I have the right lens?
Yeah.
So, but I do try to go in and sort of listen, like it's the being seen and listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I do it with a twin lens film camera, which I have to say is now so unusual that people come up and talk to me, which is really nice. And to me, like what you're saying about the camera is a bit of a conversation piece. It is, it can be.
Yeah.
Sounds like you've had a very varied career, which has been quite interesting. You've touched a little bit about sort of what motivates you, sort of like documenting and, sort of looking at, what have traditionally been sort of, the queer community.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other motivations that kind of drive you?
I guess I've always, like since a kid, always just had to do stuff, like creative stuff. I've always just wanted to be good at, like, to me, like doing art was like always the thing, like that sort of would like make me interesting or give me an edge or whatever. Now I've been doing a lot of sort of collaborative work over the last sort of about 5-6 years. And it's like the people that I'm working with, they energize me so much. So yeah, that's a motivation. It just feels so good. I get such a buzz from working with interesting people, being around creative people. It's just, it gives me life, it's like it's food. So I guess yes, that's definitely a motivation. Meeting interesting people, it's definitely sort of the people.
And what sort of projects are you working on with in these collaborations?
So for the past 7 years or so, I've been working on a big project called People Like Us. which is literally I'm about to launch as a photo book finally.
Yeah.
But it started, so it's People Like Us. It's a book exploring trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming identities, all from AFAB, assigned female at birth, perspectives. And it started back in 2017 when a friend was sort of playing with a new name and was sort of start in the very early days of the transition. And we were chatting and I was learning stuff and I was like, oh, I felt that my archive was very lacking in this sort of demographic. I've always photographed the people around me. I've always had this thing where I have to get to know people before I photograph them. I've never wanted, although my work can be like look voyeuristic and have that aesthetic, getting to know someone is like really, that's really important. And so there was a lot of gay men in my work and that previously. So anyway, I was learning. And then also around that time, other people that I knew were starting to come out as non-binary. So really starting to see other people coming out and I was sort of chatting with them. And it was a lot of talking. I didn't want to do a project like there was, it was just a lot of talking and learning and having a laugh, really, getting to know some of these people better. And then I was like, oh, maybe there is a project in this, and people like had a real appetite back then. I mean, it seems like now it feels like there's loads of work like around this demographic, and which is brilliant, but there wasn't much back then. And so my friends certainly had a real appetite for doing something, so we started sort of photo shoots exploring aspects of their identities that they were interested in exploring. And it was very much led by what they wanted to do. And like binding came up quite a bit initially, which was something I didn't think I'd do because I thought maybe it'd be a bit cliche, or even I didn't know if I'd get that personal initially. It's like gone way beyond that now. But it was the things that they wanted to do, things that were happening in their lives. And so a project was born, and it's grown and grown to there's 58 people in the book. Initially, so after about 12 people in 2020, I did like a little zine, and a lot of the people in the project I have photographed sort of multiple times. And we've done loads of stuff with it. So as well as sort of one-on-one photo shoots, we've done like little community shoots, did like a football game and shoot where someone wanted to have that experience that they hadn't had as a child. So we had this sort of idea of living experiences that they didn't have growing up as children. So the sort of things, these sort of dreams. And we've done live photo shoots at clubs. We did a thing with Ducky back in 2021 at one of their, they always do this antidote to gay pride, big party called Gay Shame. And to be honest, until very recently, their audience was predominantly cisgendered gay men and some lesbians. not so much. It's definitely progressed now. But when we did our installation, we really stood out, and we created a space that was sort of very trans, non-binary, and people appreciated it. And so we did this really sexy live shoot and we held this space and took it up, and that was really cool. I've done quite a lot of talks. Also started an audio project, got hours and hours of audio, which we want to do something with, but we've done something for the book with it, some little sort of talking pictures, but there's a lot more to do. And then all of this year, I've been working on the photo book, which was always something that I thought I'd probably do. I think since doing my first photo book, it feels like, oh yeah, I'll make photo books. I don't know how to have exhibitions unless it's just me spending a lot of time and money in some warehouse, which I refuse to do anymore. But I think photo books are a good way of getting your work out into the world and into people's hands who are going to benefit from it, actually.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of the work you're doing, as you said, creates the space, but also, allows people to be seen and heard, and this leads on to my next question, I think, quite well. It sounds like you've been kind of in the queer scene for a fair bit of time. Have you seen changes, and what kind of changes have you seen?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, also, I'm older now, so I see things differently, maybe. But yeah, I mean, I moved to London in 2001, and I was like not that far for a few years before that at university. So that first decade, well, for me, was just very male, very gay, very clubby, very druggy. I'm sure that that still exists, but I think it's more about me evolving. I think the sort of the weird, really queer stuff that I was first encountering that I mentioned, I think that's become a lot more mainstream, wouldn't be the right word, but there's a lot more of that, which has kind of diluted it a bit. There's still some really brilliant weirdos out there, though, doing really interesting stuff for sure. But there's just a lot. But I guess that's a good thing. But I'm not really, I don't go out loads. I used to go out all the time, and I don't so much now anyway. So, but yeah, I mean, definitely, there's huge nights that are trans non-binary centered. There wasn't that before. And so that, that's definitely evolved for sure.
So it sounds like it's kind of an evolution of the scene, but also an evolution of you, which, quite frankly, I think is natural. I think we all evolve, or should evolve anyway, in my opinion.
Yeah, my friend said you always follow the sparkle. So
Excellent. I like that.
Yeah, I'm always, after the next thing.
But I think that's probably a good way of maybe a good. Well, not maybe. I think that's a good way of seeing life and kind of pursuing the sparkle. Why not? Life is short.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel really lucky to be around so many interesting, exciting, funny people. I think, I mean, particularly, with the project, People Like Us project, a big incentive, it has always been to generate really positive representation.
Yeah.
And joyful representation, because a lot of, and certainly the stuff that gets into the big photography exhibitions or whatever, the look is very somber and focused on the hard sort of stuff. But I've always been all the people I know, they've had some really tough times in that, but they're bloody hilarious and they're so vibrant, and why aren't we seeing that side? So particularly with this project, I think in general, because I sort of quite like to have fun, I suppose, but bringing out that side has been, the hard stuff's still going to be there, but to have fun with it, and really to bring out people's characters and personalities. And I think I'm a decent photographer, but I have realised that my skill set, the way I can apparently sort of make people feel really relaxed and free to experiment and explore and be themselves and more, is something that's sort of really helped with this project and made it what it is.
And I think what you're doing as well, or what I'm hearing, is you're giving a well-rounded. You're adding to the story. It's not just one thing or another. It's kind of giving nuance. It's giving depth to people and kind of a more holistic approach rather than it's this or that.
Yeah, I like one of the participants, I remember them saying they loved how I kept coming back for more because they were they're not stuck in one fixed image or of themselves. They've been able to show their growth and that and I've always sort of not so much now, but until fairly recently, I didn't want to bother people. So with the photography and that, I'd always be not reserved, but definitely cautious. And definitely at the start of this project, I was really, really cautious. And, again, I think that's a strength in it in the long term. But yeah, I'm always cautious with new people. I don't want to be, but my confidence has grown massively with this project. And I have learned that people want the attention. It's a two-way thing.
So your book is coming out in December 2024, and if people can't make the event or haven't pre-ordered, they can order it by your website. So, looking beyond the book and, coming to my last question. So you're coming out with this book shortly or in December. What's next? Do you have any plans after this, or do you think it will come to you, post-launch of your book?
So next year, with the book, I want to do like a tour all around the UK, sort of going around like sort of queer, independent, feminist, intersectional bookshops, around the UK. So it's not just London. There are people in the project from all around the UK as well, although most of it has happened in London. So that's something that I'd like to do. So I think next year's a lot about the book and just getting it sort of further afield and that.
In 2025?
Yes, in 2025. So there'll be that. I would love to have an exhibition of this project, but I still, at this point in my career, I don't know how to get an exhibition without doing it myself, and that's something I don't want to do anymore. So anyone out there wants to exhibit us, let me know. But then also in terms of making more work, I do want to slow it down. I mean, I'm still working with people from this project, and the archive in general is ongoing, and the crossover between my freelance and my personal work. But I also want to take some time to go back into research and to sort of slow it down. And I think when I was doing those darkroom installations, that was the queerest thing I ever did. I knew it was different at the time and that's what I was trying to do, but that really was queer photography. And I've sort of ended up photographing queer people and trying to do that as queerly as possible. And I think that just sort of, that's organic, that happens because we're, who we are. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of people making this kind of work now, and the sort of representation and that. So I want to dig deeper, maybe go backwards a bit and just maybe take more blurry pictures or something. Apparently that's what queer photography is. But go into other processes and find a way to evolve my photography somehow.
Well, thank you. It's been really interesting and fun speaking with you, and good luck with your future projects.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you listening to this final episode of the series with Holly. I hope you enjoyed it. For more information about Holly, including their social media handles, check out the episode notes. I really appreciate it if you could also rate and review the podcast in the podcast apps. I look forward to you joining me for the next series of this podcast.